All right, welcome everyone who's just joining us for today's webinar. Very excited to have you on today, talking a little revenue marketing. We'll get started here in a couple minutes. We've got a bunch of people that are, I don't know about you, Katie, like I feel like it isn't necessarily any easier working from, remotely or wherever you are. It used to be like you'd finish a meeting and have to go to another room or go to another conference room or God help you, another building.
Right.
And of course, our calendars assume that like as soon as one meeting ends, your next meeting is able to start immediately. Right. Which assumes you can get there, let alone if you have to pee or do anything, between meetings.
And now we're on camera all day. So if you're eating, you kind of, it's awkward to be eating on camera. It's a whole new world of exposure. And there's so many pros to digital first, but there've been some adjustments too.
Yeah. No, what I like is, you can definitely, there's that middle ground of like, should I be there in person? Should we do a call? And I think both sides now are like, no, let's just do this. I can see you. We can do the facial expression thing. I don't have as I look out the window here, it is just, in Seattle, it is just a crummy day. I don't want to get in this traffic, whatever that looks like. So, sitting here in my warm little office, this ain't bad.
Right. I agree.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Excited to have everyone joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this session. So if you if you're joining us a little late, you'll be able to get this. We have a jam-packed schedule of topics and questions for Katie Foote today. Couple housekeeping things first. We are recording this, so if you don't mind clicking the got it record thing, make sure you're okay with us being part of that. Appreciate that. We'll make sure everyone gets a copy of this recording afterward as well. This is also full contact. This is not like 45 minutes of slides. This is going to be a discussion. We got a lot of questions for Katie. We're going to cover a lot of ground on revenue marketing, but also very excited to get your questions and your contributions to this as well. So if you have a question for Katie or myself as we talk about revenue marketing today, please put that in the chat. If you have an answer to one of our questions, I would love to get that as well. So we're going to make this full participatory. It's going to go super fast. We're going to have some fun, learn a little bit on the way as well. So for those of you that are attending live, thank you for joining us. We're recording this on the last day of the month. For those of you on a calendar, fiscal is the last day of your quarter. Hope everything's going well. Take a deep breath. It's all going to be fine. Before I ask my first question to Katie, just if you're attending live, please go ahead. Just introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, where you're watching from, what company you're at, what role you're in. If you have any questions, sort of like, why are you here? What are you hoping to learn? We'd love to see the chat as well. And I'll take a look at that as well. But very excited to be joined today by Katie Foote, who, when we started, Katie, talking about doing this webinar, you were the SVP of Revenue Marketing for Drift. As of 4 days ago, now the newly minted Chief Marketing Officer of Drift. So welcome and congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's a very exciting time to be at Drift. I was able to really cut my teeth on learning all about the organization and focusing primarily on revenue and on pipeline for the first 4 months that I was with the company. I'd previously come from, I started my career actually in higher education, and then I moved, it moved at a very slow pace. I was looking for something a little bit faster. So I joined a small email marketing startup in Indianapolis called Exact Target, helped take that company public. I was at Salesforce for 8 years. So it's been a wild ride, but I'm grateful to be here as the CMO at Drift.
So 4 months at Drift, you probably get a sense now that Drift is not a slow moving company. Drift is in fact quite the opposite. It's been exciting to watch not only the growth of Drift, but also sort of the evolution of conversational marketing, and to watch a company really grow and provide a playbook, quite frankly, to companies. I know a lot of the Drift leadership founders come from HubSpot. There's a lot of echoes in terms of the go-to-market strategy between those two organizations. And part of that echo is also doing business the right way. Right. And the right way to do business, the right way to sell, the right way to treat people internally, to build a culture. Talk a little bit about, you've been at Salesforce for a long time, obviously successful there. You could have gone anywhere. I don't want to make this commercial for Drift, but what about Drift and the company opportunity and culture was interesting to you?
It's interesting. It was really hard to leave Salesforce. Phenomenal organization, had a tremendous, growth experience across multiple marketing disciplines in my time there. So it was going to take something special for me to be able to make the leap to leave. And I remember having conversations early on with our leadership at the time. And I remember saying to my husband, oh no, this is going to be hard to say no to. I was just very inspired by our co-founders, David and Elias. being Latinx co-founders, having had to work tremendously hard throughout their career to get where they are today. And I was really inspired by the leadership principles that exist at Drift. You know, my personal values anchor around relationships, being able to make impact, to drive momentum and progress. And one of their leadership principles is all about being a curious learning machine. And so I love that idea of openness. We can always do something better. What is the art of the possible? That ultimately allowed me to make that leap. And it's been a 4-month whirlwind, but I'm deeply grateful to be here.
Awesome. Well, 4-month whirlwind that is, I'm assuming, only going to get sort of greater and faster and more interesting as you take over all of the marketing function. But today I want to make sure we focus on this concept of revenue marketing. Yeah. And there's a lot of different ways we can sort of describe this. I think, there are still plenty of, B2B marketing organizations that either act as or operate as or are perceived as a glorified arts and crafts department, or maybe are doing some, pipeline contributing efforts, but are more focused on what I think of as the marketing of more clicks, more likes, more retweets. Even MQLs in some cases is really, quite frankly, a vanity metric. Yeah. So when we think about revenue marketing, we think about this as a function, but really also as a culture change within marketing organizations. How do you define that?
Yeah, well, actually, when I joined as the SVP of Revenue Marketing, it was new to Drift. This was a very strategic decision we made to really bring together pre-purchase all the way to post-purchase across every stage of the customer lifecycle. And so it's not just marketing's responsibility to help generate high-quality leads and partner very closely with the sales organization to convert those into pipeline, but we have a role and responsibility to play in maturing that pipeline, helping with win rates through sales references, through really, experiential ABM or field marketing activities. And then once we have customers on board, how are we surprising and delighting them with programs that set them up for success after they go live? How are we helping them understand the art of the possible as it relates to expansion? And by doing that effectively across every stage of the customer lifecycle, you actually end up with advocates who are going to sing your praises out into the ether and start the process all over again. So that was really the philosophy behind it. I think the reality when I parachuted into the role is revenue marketing, though we can put it on paper as an org structure with a leader, it's a mindset. And I think marketing has a really unique opportunity to act as the stewards of pipeline and revenue across the entire organization. And so the way I talk about it with my team is if we put revenue and pipeline at the center, all of the work that we do should be in service of that. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's why we all have jobs at the company. And if we do that in a way that puts the customer and prospect at the center to deliver those surprise and delight experiences, everybody wins.
Okay, I want to unpack a couple of things that you said because that was really, really good. First of all, you mentioned that this is not just a function, this is a mindset. So when I think about that, and I like that a lot, because doing revenue marketing is not really, I'm going to steal a line from Craig Rosenberg, who was at Topo, now Gartner. Like, this isn't a campaign. This is a culture change. Like, you got to change the way people think about and prioritize and even triage the daily, weekly work that they're doing. What are some of the ways that you're only 4 months in, but what are some of the ways you are sort of working to sort of build that revenue marketing culture and mindset in the organization?
We've made a couple org changes, and it's as tactical as having a visual that says, here's revenue and pipeline. I think historically at the organization, we were focused much more like a traditional SMB might operate, where you're trying to just fill the top of funnel with leads and then you walk away. Well, I believe that we have a responsibility to supply high quality leads, to foster healthy. Our whole value proposition at Drift is around conversations. So how are we helping create as many conversations as possible with the customer and the prospect at the center? And so we are tactically, talking about this mindset shift as a team. We're prioritizing our work based on what's going to drive pipeline and revenue for our business. That's what gets the most, even in our hiring, when we have a headcount, when we have someone who decides to pursue an opportunity outside of the company, instead of just backfilling that carte blanche, let's re-examine what that headcount was in service of and how could it potentially be reallocated to be in service of revenue. So it's a mindset, it's a way in which we work, it's a way in which we prioritize. And then we have a very robust set of KPIs that we're starting to look at and monitor and dig into to understand how we're doing against that new charter.
Love that. Want to remind everyone, just quickly say hi. I want to say hi to Aaron, Becky, Gloria, Steve, others that are joining us here. Thanks for chiming in and saying hello. For everybody that is attending here, this is Katie. She's the CMO of Drift. This is your chance to ask Katie your deep burning questions about revenue marketing. So make sure you throw those in and we'll get to those as well. Katie, when I asked you about sort of defining revenue marketing, the other thing I wanted to go back to was you talked about win rates. You talked about customer journey post-sale. I mean, and that stands out when you ask people about revenue marketing, even those that are sort of saying, hey, we're changing the way marketing is perceived, we're becoming a partner to sales. A lot of times that's very focused on acquisition. That's very focused on the top half of the acquisition funnel. Well, let's agree on what kind of leads you want. Let's make sure we're walking marketing influence on sale. You're implying that you're having a much higher, more active role in driving the close, as well as thinking beyond just acquisition into lifetime value. Talk about that. I want a two-part question. One, talk about that as a culture change in an organization. And then I want to get to sort of what tactically does that include?
I think in terms as it relates to the culture change, I just believe strongly that marketing has an incredible opportunity internally to be the connective tissue that binds an organization together. We like pretty things. We like messaging. We like content. We like to drive really magical experiences. We can do that internally as much as we can do that externally. And so if we think about that as it relates to revenue, and also as it relates to customer experiences across every stage of the life cycle, who's better positioned to do that than marketing? So as it relates to like, okay, how are we tactically doing that? I mean, there's an order of priority. You've got to make sure that you have a reliable, predictable funnel to begin with, and that's a joint partnership with sales. But once you've created those opportunities, how are you helping sales to nurture those opportunities, especially as you go up market, deal cycles become more complex, there's more buyers, you're having to interact with the C-suite potentially. I think there's a huge role for pretty dedicated account-based marketing programs that are more one-to-one in nature. I don't think anyone speaks the value to your brand more than your own customers. So empowering happy customers, I think of it as like Match.com, taking a happy customer and pairing them with a prospect late in the deal cycle to be the final push that account might need. And then once a customer signs on, that first impression is super important to whether or not they're going to be loyal to your brand, to make sure that they feel seen and heard. And I think marketing has a tremendous opportunity to deliver, exciting go live programs, to help with migration campaigns if we have to move a customer from one plan to another, to celebrate things like anniversaries. That's what creates true advocates. And then, of course, I'm deeply passionate about customer marketing, and we are really fortunate at Drift to be able to demonstrate time to value pretty quickly. Our customers are deeply appreciative of the ROI we can help to generate. And so they're willing to share their stories. We're going to be standing up a new advocacy program this year to capture those stories and to also bring, it's always not just what are our customers doing for us? It's how are we bringing them together to share, to, help swap stories, to have birds of a feather conversations. So I think these are a couple tactical examples for how marketing can help through the entire life cycle.
So before I ask my follow-up, I want to throw up our first polling question and pile. Let's do the revenue marketing sort of polling question first, if we could. I want to get a sense, now that we've spent a little bit of time defining and having Katie walk through kind of components of what revenue marketing is or could be, based on your understanding inside your organization of revenue marketing, would love to get a sense for sort of how well do you think you're doing it? How do you think you're currently tackling it? And this is meant to be sort of a current temperature check on potentially sort of where you are across what Katie has talked about, as well as where are you across just what it could be in your organization beyond just this. And I think, not to sort of talk too much about Drift here today, but I think, if you think about the opportunity with conversational marketing, this isn't just a marketing element. There are sales teams interacting with Drift. There are customer success teams and account management. Literally, if you are customer facing, there's an opportunity here as you think about sort of now really creating and expanding this revenue marketing function within Drift. How do you get other departments to align with that at a strategic level with those department leaders, as well as what are the ways you start to figure out what that looks like on Tuesday? Like, how do you operationalize that?
I think just at a very basic level, I've always tried to operate first from a place of building a solid relationship. And the way you build a solid relationship is you listen and you try to understand, you help people be seen and heard. What are your challenges? What pain points are you facing? And you do that internally. You go on a listening tour. I tried to act as a sponge early when I came into the organization and understand what are our CRO's challenges? What's our chief product officer's challenges? And generally speaking, a problem halved is a problem solved. So if we can offer ourselves up to be helpful, to be customer service oriented within the organization, getting the buy-in to have marketing help shepherd and be a steward for revenue and pipeline, it's not a hard sell, right? Yeah. Every team would love more help.
Yeah. I just couple things to note here. Of our attendees, I'm watching people that are chiming in. Like, this is an international event here, Katie. We've got people from multiple countries, multiple continents joining us. So Cecilia, Carla, so many folks, thanks so much for joining us. So we asked this question. The poll question was, how well would you say your team is currently tackling revenue marketing? 0% so far have said, great, we're experts. A couple people have said, what's revenue marketing? At this point, we're 15 minutes in. I would hope you wouldn't be there, but that's fine. We can retread that ground. 55%, the majority, Katie, said we could use some help. This doesn't surprise me.
No.
Right? Because I think that, it's one thing to say, listen, we're creating more maybe sales impact on marketing. We're creating a higher quality lead or a higher quality set of demand for sales. But when you start to define this as, direct sales enablement efforts, when you start to talk about customer advocacy, when you start to talk about customer lifecycle entirely, not just through the first acquisition point, that certainly is beyond where people are today. I could imagine that some people, well, the people who don't know revenue marketing probably have a little more, but for people, they could use some help. Like, where do they start? Like, because I think we could spend another half hour talking about the full blueprint, and we will spend time going into more detail, but it can be intimidating to figure out where to get going.
Yeah, this probably sounds somewhat cliche, and simple, but relationships. It's doing that exercise around like building relationships, operating from the same playbook of your sales organization, first and foremost. Mm-hmm. There's such a cliche around sales versus marketing. It's the age old story of, well, marketing doesn't send me enough leads, so therefore I'm not going to follow up on them, or they're not high quality enough. And marketing will say, well, why aren't you following up on our leads? I think you've got to squash that from the get-go, really try to understand and put yourself in the shoes of sales to know, like, it's not an easy job, right? We're asking them to go out on the front lines. They're quota bearing. I really view marketing, and I'm passionate about marketing, as being joined at the hip. We are one team. It's not their quota, it's our quota. So I think that's a really good place to start. And then I guess to further extend that, understanding your ideal customer profile. So who are you trying to initially acquire? What are their pain points? How is your marketing speaking? What channels are they on? How is your marketing showing up in market? We've done a lot of analysis internally just to get more visibility into that as we build our go-to-market strategy. We didn't have a ton of visibility early on for what investments we're driving through what channels. When did that show up in terms of pipeline in the funnel? Mm-hmm. There's a component of that. And then I think there's a third component around operationalizing some of it. Are you getting in your own way beyond just the relationships? Like, do you have what are the expectations for follow-up? How are you measuring those? How are we working together as one team? I think working off of the same data set too is really important, because if I'm analyzing data from one particular source of truth and my sales ops team is analyzing it from a different source of truth, like, we're going to come up with different answers for what to do. So, it's the people and relationships, it's the process and operational rigor internally. And it's just making sure that you've done your due diligence on analysis for the right go-to-market strategy as well.
Yeah, I like Gloria's comment here talking about, like, we can talk about revenue marketing all day long, but sales has to sort of accept that. Sales has to, and I think, like, as marketers, the collective have done a pretty poor job of this over time, right? We've done a pretty poor job of truly partnering with sales, of delivering on that promise. It's one thing to go to sales kickoff and say, oh, we're all focused on revenue, but sales watches our actions. It's like, today's the last day of the week, or last day of the month, last day of the quarter for a lot of people. Like, how many marketing teams are in the pit grinding with their sales teams right now? How many of them are thinking about win rates? How many of them are willing to create, content for an audience of one to get that big enterprise deal across the line when there's one member of the buying committee that still has an objection? So, like, what are some of the things you can do to start to bridge that gap with your sales counterparts?
Well, I think it is backing up your actions. I'll give you an example. We market, right? So we're good at telling a story, But when I came into Drift, what I kept writing on a note card that I always had persistent at my desk was quick wins for sales, quick wins for sales. Like, because that action, even if it's a one-page data sheet that you're writing yourself. I mean, I wrote a video script in my first 30 days to try to generate some excitement around an internal campaign where we were helping AEs contribute to the pipeline problem that we were facing. I think you're right, Matt, no job is too small. What quick wins can you demonstrate to sales to truly build that trust? And then you can try to boil the ocean or do more strategic things over time, but you have to really be in it with them and be willing to give them the small tools that they need to be successful.
I want to throw our next polling question up around sort of addressing the customer's needs. And I want to ask you, Katie, like, I mean, in your time at Salesforce, as well as like you think about this, who needs to own understanding the customer, right? Yeah. And I think that we're seeing a movement now among chief marketing officers to embrace the role of chief market officer. So you're not just the manager and owner of the campaigns, that you actually sort of have ownership of the addressable market at the ICP who we're targeting. And a lot of that has to do with how well you understand who you're solving problems for. How do you guys think about that at Drift?
Well, I think if we anchor back into this idea that marketing is the connective tissue across the organization, we do play a large role in providing those insights back to the product organization. We do that in a couple ways at Drift, and we did this in a couple ways at Salesforce. So I think customer focus groups are actually really important. You can use it to test new messaging. You can ask questions about pain points and solutions. You always want to be speaking in the voice of the customer and meeting them where they're at. So the way to do that is to actually do the research. Product marketing plays that role for us in many ways. We have a dedicated voice we've had a dedicated voice of the customer position to be always gathering that information and sharing those insights back into product. I think the sales organization has like feet on the street and can anecdotally share some of the things they're experiencing and some of the challenges they're running into. So between, the external focus group conversations you're having, the anecdotal feedback you're getting from sales, and what you're hearing from services, marketing has a role to play in synthesizing that and having a point of view on what we need to go and do as a result. I will add, we are launching our first customer advisory board. And I think that's a critical, group of top customers who are users of your product. And we want to create an unfiltered space for them to give that direct feedback. So that's a key tactic that we use as well.
Yeah, I love that. Before we get to our polling question, where we're asking people on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd love to get a few more responses on this as well. Like, how confident do you feel like you're addressing your customers' needs, like not just understanding those customers, but actually addressing those customer needs as well? You mentioned that you've got some initiatives in place, Katie, to start to sort of capture and to sort of collate and leverage some of those insights. Are there specific tools or technologies that you've used or seen that you think are really good at doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we've used a variety of different surveying tools. We actually just implemented Gainsight into our app to allow us to communicate more seamlessly within our product. There's not one off the top of my head that we think is the end all be all. So we're always open to exploring new marketing technologies to be able to ensure that feedback loop exists with our customers.
All right. So scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you're addressing your customers' needs? We got some pretty confident people here, Katie. We got 46% gave a 4 out of 5. Very impressive. Whoever said 5 out of 5, you're hired, you're promoted to panelist. We want to hear from you for the next 15 minutes or so. But 46% giving a 4 out of 5, I thought was pretty good. I would love to hear from some folks in the chat, especially those that gave yourself pretty high rankings. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are the things that you would say are the reasons why you give yourself a high score? What's some of the evidence? What are some of the initiatives and efforts that you have internally around that? So back to the concept, Katie, of revenue marketing. Like, we've talked about some of the scope of what's included in revenue marketing. We've talked a little bit about how to sort of build a culture change and sort of build connective tissue between departments. How do we measure all this? How do we know we're being successful at doing this? This is no longer just like, I get this many leads, right? Yeah. So like, what's the scorecard look like for revenue marketing today?
Yeah, we have actually some really cool rituals at Drift that we repeat every week because we feel like it's everyone's responsibility to understand what's happening in the business. And so we have something called Monday Metrics, where the entire company comes together. And for each department, we showcase a suite of metrics and KPIs to show how we're doing, which I think is actually really important as we talk about that cultural shift to a revenue mindset. Specifically for marketing, what we show on our scorecard each week is we're obviously looking, and we have an account-centric model. So when I talk about leads, I'm actually talking about the number of accounts that come in. So we show the number of accounts that have come in, the qualified accounts, which are a subset of those. We look at meetings booked, meetings held, pipeline that's been created in both dollar and count. We're looking at win rates. We're also looking at other key leading indicators like website traffic, ownership of our branded and non-branded keywords. The conversations that we're obviously having via our product on our website are critical because, again, our value proposition is all around conversations and meeting customers where they're at. And then we're also looking at how quickly we're able to follow up with the folks who are raising their hand and want to learn more, all the way down to where those sources are coming from. So we have a pretty robust set of data that we're looking at on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, to ensure that we're delivering on our promise of conversations.
Yeah. Question from David around sort of what accounts come in. Just want to make sure you clarify that for him.
Yeah. So it's someone from a particular account, but then we look at that account. The direction that we give to our sales development team is, okay, great. This individual came in from this particular location on an account. We're now we call it fanning up and out. So we look at that person's title. We obviously respond and have a conversation with them, but then we look for additional colleagues or other contacts within that organization. And so when a qualified lead is passed over to an SDR, for example, they're going to have that conversation, but they're going to try to talk to 3 to 5 other folks within the organization. Because we find that, with the buying committees continuing to grow, especially in this digital age, that's really important for us. And again, conversations are a value proposition. So we want to have a lot of them, and we want to better understand how our solution might meet the need of that particular organization.
I like Steve's comment here about sort of making sure you're focused on that third leg of revenue marketing, customer success. And Scott had mentioned earlier the idea of customer advisory boards, right? And sort of like, and to me, that's one way to continually have your pulse on what your customers are thinking. Of course, advisory boards represent a representative group of customers. But what are some ways that you can make sure you really are staying attuned to your customers? I mean, the best companies I see operate sort of for, over generations are those that focus on customers and problems, not products. Like they are customer and product centric organizations, and you have to, and that changes over time. What are the ways that you stay on the pulse and stay current on customers and problems?
Well, first of all, we have a pretty robust community with an insider. So there's a lot of folks, users of our product. We're offering up, content in those communities and forums, but folks can talk with one another. And I think having a listening ear to that channel to understand what the problems are is really important. I think there's a huge opportunity over time for us to evolve, not just beyond, like, cabs are important, but I think we also need user groups where we're bringing people together. We are listening to some of the feedback from the folks that are in the product each and every day. And then we're building product based on the problems, to your point, Matt, and not the other way around. Those are just a couple ways in which we're listening. And then I personally think it's important for employees in an organization, sit in on sales calls, listen to what the conversations are that are happening. As I've tried to onboard quickly at Drift, I listen to gong calls every weekend so I can understand what are prospects asking or what are customers asking. Sit in on SDR conversations and calls. Those are illuminating. It's one thing to sit in a separate room and come up with a strategy, but involving yourself in those, just listening to those conversations, you can learn a ton.
I would triple down on your comment about sort of gong calls. Like if you aren't using a gong or a chorus, or even, the technology is now embedded in some of the sales enablement tools like SalesLoft and others, to have that regular touch point. And Scott, to your point, like, the CABs can be a nice deep dive, but being able to regularly listen to what your customers are saying and doing is important. So we talked a little bit about the customer and the problems. I do want to address the buying process and sort of like the steps that customers do go through, not just in buying, but using and expanding and enabling. And I'm curious if you have seen any trends around how that may have changed in the last year and a half. Like we were joking before about, being able to sort of like not have to get out in the crappy traffic and just do this, virtually. And certainly there are still lots of really good reasons to get in person. But I think the motions we are following now have certainly changed, and we are certainly leaning way more digital than before. What are some big trends you have seen in changes in the buying journey and steps through COVID that you think are now going to be permanent parts of that journey?
Yeah, well, I think we know at a minimum that marketing budgets are now, I think it's 70% all digital, which is a pretty big shift over the past 5 years from what they were previously. And I think COVID certainly accelerated that. So just the resources you have at your disposal as a marketer are largely digital plays. The trick there then is how do you stand out? Because you're suddenly going head to head with people who maybe weren't previously competitors across all digital channels. The whole premise for why Drift was founded in the first place was that the power has moved from like a sales centric or company centric motion to a consumer centric motion. If I think about my own behavior, before I go on a trip, I'm going to research. I am going to look at ratings and reviews on that particular trip. So I think not underestimating that as a marketer and keeping your eye on having a solid strategy across those channels is important. But yeah, I think what's here to stay is, and that's why I think chat, so many folks prefer to chat, prefer to text, I think our value proposition has worked really well in the digital age. And and also that expectation, if we think about our busy lives, I'm sometimes not doing research till 10 o'clock at night when I sit down. So the whole concept of being able to respond 24/7 and get routed to the right person to be able to have a conversation, I think that's here to stay.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's important to distinguish between customer needs and buying emotions. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. So the channels and the sequence you're using to engage with your buyers and customers, they may have shifted. And I think different industries, different ways. I think there's plenty of digital natives that are like, well, finally, frick, I don't want to get, I don't want, and, we see this movement from fields, even before COVID, this movement from field sales to inside sales. And as sellers, we could be like, this is way more efficient. It's way more cost effective. Our CAC has gone down. Yeah. But buyers didn't want you in their office either, right? And so they don't have time for this. So we put a polling question up, our last poll question for this event today. How have you seen the buying dynamic change in your organization over the last year and a half since COVID? Pretty even here, Katie. We've got 45% that says it's changed a little, 25% says it's changed a lot. You got 30% that say it's changed the same, right? And I think that to me, like the fact that it's pretty well spread, but we have a material percent of people that have said it's staying the same is super relevant to me, and it sort of separates that. You know what? Like, don't get so enamored with the channels that you're not putting focus on the value for the audience you're speaking to.
Yeah. And just to come full circle on your question around what we've seen from a buying standpoint, we've seen more people needing to be involved in a deal and a decision. And I think in large part, COVID has created some uncertainty still from a budgetary standpoint. So marketers may have one budget to spend this year, and suddenly we're going up against competitors that weren't previously competitors. So I think that is one challenge that we've seen as a result of COVID, that they're taking longer. We need to talk to more people, even in a digital world where we're not going on site, coordinating calendars, navigating the back-to-backs. Those are additional challenges that we've certainly seen in our business.
When we defined a lot around sort of revenue marketing. We've talked about partnering with organizations across the buying journey. I mean, it's easy sometimes to say, well, content marketing and brand development, like that's a separate function. But I want to get a sense from you how you think about that relative to revenue marketing. I could argue that, like, as you build trust and credibility, your ability to continue that conversation, to do sense making in the terminology of Brent Adamson and his recent research around sort of taking all this content and making sense of it for customers. That's a key part of this. Yeah. How do you align brand and content with this revenue marketing function moving forward?
Yeah. So the way I think about it, we've really invested heavily in building what we call, just a really solid organic marketing strategy that we get insights from the platform that we use that then acts as the central brain. What are people actually searching for? It's one thing, I think sometimes brands can get a little lofty in their vision, like here's what we're building and this is the future and here's the category we're going to call it. But the market is searching for something else and they say this is our need. So you have to strike the right balance between being out in front and leading a horse to water, and also just being pragmatic about what people are searching for today. So we use those insights for what people are searching to develop our content. And we do so, all of our content development is in a helpful tone, in a humble tone. Like, here's what we think we've heard you're thinking about. Here's how we think we could help. Here's some additional tips and tricks. So creating that central brain that provides insights, which then leads to helpful content across a variety of mediums is really what we're striving to achieve.
Got about 10 minutes left with our scheduled time with Katie. And I know you're 4 days into being CMO, super busy. So appreciate you taking time to do this with us today. Last chance, folks, if you're watching here live, to ask some questions of Katie, revenue marketing related. We covered a lot of ground. So clearly we can, any and all questions around revenue marketing and surrounding efforts are at play. Best laid plans rarely survive contact with the battlefield, right? So it's time to say, okay, here's where you start. Here's the functions you should put in place. Here's the conversations you should have with some of your peers in other organizations. Where do things fall apart? Like, where have you seen common reasons why revenue efforts start to deteriorate? And sort of what can those be? How can those serve as warning signs for organizations to make sure they're covering, to make sure these are sustainable efforts versus short-term losses?
Well, I think you have to first and foremost set up a cadence of communication where you're coming together and analyzing data together. We call them pipeline councils, where we come together every other week. We look at the data, the health of the business top to bottom from all contributing parties, right? Because revenue is not one team, it's all of us. Right. So I think very tactically, that's something you can do. I also think it's important to know when to hold steady in the storm. So we built a whole new spend to impact calculator. We didn't have a ton of visibility into like, when I spend $1 today, when is that going to show up in my pipeline? We've done a ton of analysis to get more visibility into that. We've changed our investment strategy, but you have to be careful not to change too many things at once because you're not going to understand up from down. So I would caution folks with, make wise decisions based on data and then hold steady for a moment. Look at some of the key leading indicators, get a sense for how you think you're doing before having a knee-jerk reaction and changing yet another thing.
We talked about metrics already, and there's a lot of really great initiatives you can put together, but I think there's metrics initiatives, and then there's just language, right? I mean, like for a CFO to hear marketers using revenue-centric language, if you're a growth phase company, we've got a lot of companies that are private equity backed, to hear a marketing organization talk about and reflect EBITDA goals in terms of sort of marketing initiatives. Like, even if you don't have great scorecards around it, even if you're not doing it yet, simply asking those questions and using that language it's going to throw your CFO off. Like, she's going to wonder, like, how I've never heard a marketer talk about that before. So like, talk a little bit about the importance of language in starting this conversation.
Well, I think it starts with education. If you truly want to be empathetic, if your perspective is your shared service to the organization, then you need to understand the language with which sales is talking about. You have to understand the language of finance and how they're measuring the business. And then you need to do your due diligence to understand that and see how it relates to your job. You don't have to be an expert in GAAP versus non-GAAP, reporting, but you need to have some awareness. It's all of our responsibility to be good corporate citizens, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, we're here to deliver an amazing customer experience and to drive revenue. And we have to be educated on some level to be able to do that.
And what are some of the ways that you recommend people do that with people in the organization that may sort of have this sort of archaic view of marketing or may not really even understand marketing? I saw some research earlier this year from Google that said that only 3 to 4% of board members have ever had a marketing role. They've never had a direct marketing role. So their perception of marketing is going to be all over the map. How do we start to build that relationship and credibility from a revenue marketing perspective?
I think it has been all over the map. I think it's because historically we think of marketers as like the Mad Men era of coming up with a brand campaign. I think today's marketer and marketing leader needs to be very operationally focused, savvy on the business, but also bring that creativity. So it's a big ask. And I would argue, I think one of the challenges of being a leader in marketing is that everyone likes to presume they are also a marketer. I wouldn't necessarily presume I'm a finance expert, but sometimes finance might presume they're a marketing expert. So I think being able to understand the different parts of the business, and then communication is key. When I first joined Drift, I started something called the Friday 5. So every week I post 5 must-know pieces of information from revenue marketing. We've since expanded it to all of marketing, but an example would be, did you know that the #1 search term last week was live chatbot? And here's what that means for our business. And it's starting to educate people on what marketing is and what we think about in a helpful way. So, and it's become, sales has loved it. It's kind of taken off in the organization. I think that's one just tactical way where you just communicate more and do it in a fun way that will educate folks on marketing.
You're applying drip marketing to your internal organization. Mind blown. I love that. And I mean, I think it's a great example that, look, you can't just kind of go into a sales kickoff or go into an all hands and do a 20-minute presentation. Here's what revenue marketing means and assume everyone gets it. That reiteration of what it is and showing them proof of how you're thinking is an important part of this. So we were talking about boards. Let's go to the other side of the organization. Let's talk about newer members of your team, junior members of your team. I mean, a lot of marketers, look, we've trained them to think that the up and to the right lead volume chart is the way to go. We've trained them to say, like, it's the most possible leads at the lowest possible cost. If you're doing revenue marketing right, you might need to prioritize the opposite.
That's right.
And don't assume that when you tell that digital marketing manager what they're going to be focused on, that they'll immediately get it. And in many cases, they'll react wondering, do I still have a job? What I used to do is no longer as relevant. How do you help your team migrate to this mindset and feel comfortable and confident in the future that maybe include things that they hadn't done or measured before?
I think what helped me when I started is that we had been doing what you just described for a long time and it wasn't working. The top of the funnel was green. There were a lot of leads, there were a lot of qualified leads, but it was the conversion rates in the middle and the ultimate like output with pipeline that were red. And so we only control one piece of that. We have to get in and understand what's happening across every stage of the funnel. And so we got comfortable pretty quickly with, look, if the ultimate goal is pipeline, green pipeline, let's try to hold back a little bit more. Let's try being green, top of funnel wasn't working. So let's try being red for a minute. Let's get comfortable with that. And we've seen the conversion rates drastically improve above plan in the middle of the funnel, anchoring in that hypothesis. So I think it's just showing, it's having a hypothesis, getting everyone to agree to it, and then using data to back up the change you're trying to make.
Love it. Well, last question we have for you, and then we'll try to wrap up here. You know, we'd written down sort of this idea of sort of wondering like who can be a revenue leader.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to be a CMO to be a revenue leader. I think you can be a revenue leader anywhere in the organization. What does it take to really be a leader and an evangelist for revenue marketing in your organization?
Yeah, I think for me, I actually have a strong opinion that it's the responsibility of everyone to be a revenue leader. I start every meeting with a health of business view. Here's how the business is performing, not just marketing, but overall, here's how our business is performing. And I think that's really important. If we don't have visibility into that, how can we swarm on hotspots? How can we come together? Like we're all here as a business to try to drive revenue. And so all of us are stewards of that. And so I feel pretty strongly that anyone can, just by educating yourself on the high level performance measures of your business, can be a revenue leader. And I would argue that that's the easiest way to prioritize your work.
Love it. Well, this has gone really quickly. Thanks so much for taking time out of doing this. Drift is very lucky to have you. Katie Foote, the new CMO, Chief Marketing Officer of Drift, ladies and gentlemen. Well, where can more people learn about Drift? I know we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the product conversational marketing. I think, not only just the impact conversational has for organizations, but also kind of for companies that want to watch from the outside, the revenue marketing journey and the output represented. I think that can be a great inspiration to people. What channels do you recommend people watch to catch up on that?
I would actually go to our website. You can see the product right on our website in real life. You can interact with it. There's so much more to the story than just that product, but I will just share a personal anecdote. I worked at Salesforce for 8 years. We were very form dependent. All of the demand generation that we did was, hey, fill out this form and we'll get back to you. It's like going into an empty store and then you see a Post-it that's like, hey, fill out your name and number and we'll call you back when we get to you. Right. So it has just been transformational for me to be able to leverage this type of technology as a marketer. And so I would encourage folks to go to our website and just interact with it firsthand.
Okay, we could spend a whole nother 45 minutes talking about I don't like saying anything is dead, because I think usually when you say something is dead, it's usually you're trying to evangelize the alternative, and usually things aren't fully dead. But if we can kill forms, I think we'd be in a good place. I mean, like if someone is so interested in your content and your materials that they want to fill out a form, why would you put a barrier in front of them in the first place? Whole nother conversation we can get into. So definitely check out drift.com. You'll see not only some great examples of conversational marketing they do themselves, but lots of great insights and additional information, including the upcoming state of conversational marketing research that we've been working on together that we're just about to take under wraps. So if you're watching this live or soon after we record it, check that out as well. Katie, this has been fun. Thanks everyone for joining us today so much. Thanks for engaging with our polls and with our questions. If you're watching this live and want to watch it again, if you want to share this with other people on your marketing team, you will get a copy of this recording as well as other materials. If you're watching this on demand, you still got to check this stuff out. We got a lot more coming up. And Katie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Take care.